task of trying to figure out how to tell this dual biography of two people from completely different walks of life, different socioeconomic groups, different locations, different life stages. And so how was I going to tell the story? Well, it would have been very romantic had I been able to create a work of fiction and maybe had the liberator adopt this girl that he saved in the camp. But this is a work of nonfiction, and an event like that would have been highly improbable. There were 55 to 60,000 very sick and dying inmates in Bergen-Belsen when the brigadier and the British Second Army came in, and my mom was in very bad shape. He probably only interacted with very few of the sick survivors, and actually he later befriended some of those who helped him, who were in better shape and who had some medical background and helped in the medical relief and rescue. So how was I going to tell this story? So I decided ultimately it was going to be sort of this race against time drama. Of course, a race lost for too many thousands, but in my mom's case, she did survive. So it was really a miracle. So it was, I tell the story, the meat of the book is told over 4 seasons. And the 5th season is the point at which the 2 protagonists converge in Northwest Germany in Bergen-Belsen. He as the rescuer, her as a victim. It's sandwiched in between a prologue and an epilogue, which gave me a chance to tell very important stories, both about my mom and her prior history and a great loss that happened in her family at the very start of the war. And the epilogue really talking about who Glenn Hughes was as a person, what became of him after his relationships with survivors, and by extension, the state of Israel and his role in the history of the Jewish people. So I focused mostly on that in the epilogue. And then it's sandwiched also between a few choice pieces about the Belsen trial, which was a very significant trial. It started on September 17th, 1945, just a few months after the war. It was mandated to end just before the Nuremberg trial started on November 17th. And it was the first trial to apply international law to the war crimes, to the war criminals. And Glenn Hughes, my protagonist, was the first witness. So he set the tone at the first international war crimes trial. And this is an Army Talks magazine dated 11 November 1945. And this is a picture inside the makeshift courtroom in Lüneburg. Only 45 of the SS were being prosecuted here. There were about 480 employed guards and SS employed at Bergen-Belsen. Only 45 are being prosecuted. Most got off scot-free. 80 had to remain in the camp at the time of the handover. Here's a little snapshot of probably one of the most famous of the criminals, who was Irma Gracie. And I talk a little bit about her in the book because she was such a standout character, both for her behavior during the trial and her sadism. And she was known as the beautiful blonde beast. She was only 22 when she was beheaded. So the story I tell over 1 year's time, from the spring of 1944 to the spring of 1945, the liberation. So it starts, the scene picks up in this place called Sandhutton in the Yorkshire Wolds, where Glenn Hughes is then deputy director of the British Second Army's 8th Corps. And they would see the most intense fighting as they would come up through France, through Normandy, into Belgium, into the Netherlands. And they faced the most fanatical Nazi panzer troops. But it starts with him over here and what he's thinking and what he's preparing for, what he's planning. And with my mom, it starts in Siget, and it's just around Passover time. And it opens up with a scene actually at the Seder table, where she is sitting. There's 9 people around the table, including her baby sister and her baby cousin. And who would believe that 1 year later, she would survive with only her sister and everyone around that table, and nearly everyone from Siget, of the 11,500 Jews, 13,000 at the time of the deportation, because they brought in people from the surrounding villages. 80 to 90% of them would be gassed upon arrival in Auschwitz. And just to give you another stat, the most magnificent armada, multinational armada of Allied forces landing on the coast of Normandy, went down in the annals of military history as one of the biggest invasions, suffered half the number of Allies were killed as the number of people who were killed in Auschwitz on that very same day, June 6th, 1944. Twice the number of people were killed here than the Allied forces killed here, and the numbers decreased, the casualties decreased as the Allies fought their way into Germany, whereas the statistic in Auschwitz remained for at least a month. So this is just a little bit, I just lifted a little bit from the archives of Glenn Hughes's notes, and he had voluminous notes, a lot of it in his own handwriting, which I enjoyed deciphering because it was so beautiful and interesting to me as sort of an amateur graphologist. And so here it just shows you, here it says D-Day, D+1, D+2, D+3. It shows you the number of casualties and how he's going to commandeer various general hospitals in the various areas that they're fighting and how many beds are in each, and the special units he's bringing in. And this is just a tip of the planning things that I found, but he was extremely attentive to details, very planful, and he was promoted during the course of the war to be Deputy Director of Medical Services for the entire British Second Army. And I'm just telling you that he had people practice assembling and disassembling field hospitals, and whatever was needed, that he had surgery down to practically the second, how long it would take. And he was so prepared, but nothing could have prepared him for Bergen-Belsen. So that is going to be the rest of my talk. I'm going to kind of skip over what happened during that whole year to my mother, to Glenn Hughes, as their points of view are shown in the book that sort of represent the points of view and the experience of so many others who were traveling both with the fighting Allies and with the victims. And I'm going to skip right into that moment of convergence, April 15th, 1945 in Bergen-Belsen. There had been a truce signed between the Germans and the British 3 days before. It is a stranger than fiction story, but it's a true story of how Heinrich Himmler, rather than kill everybody in all the camps, there were orders from on high from Hitler not to turn over a single inmate alive. Rather than kill everybody, which was everybody in the camp sort of thought was going to happen, he decided to turn over Bergen-Belsen intact to the British Second Army 3 weeks before Victory in Europe Day, before the end of World War II, before the end. So the camp is being turned over, the British Army is coming in, and you see here an image of the camp and the squalor. Now, this image just reminded me of something that my mom had shared with me when I was a young teenager, the age she was when she went through this. And it, in order to get the camp ready for the British to come in, the Germans, the Nazis tried to clean it up. So what did that mean? Because you had, in March of 1945, 17,000 people died in the camp. Death was the norm. It was just, there were corpses lying everywhere, dead people, putrefying bodies everywhere. So they pressed the inmates who they had not given food or water to for 5 days. Whoever could still walk had to drag those skeletons, the dead, try to clean them up from all over the camp down a long road to a mass grave at the end of the road. And my mom demonstrated for me one night. I remember we were in the laundry room and she was ironing, and I'll really never forget it. She put down the iron and she showed me how she was talking about Auschwitz, and then she was telling me about Bergen-Belsen, and she bent forward and she stretched her arms out behind her, and she showed me how she who was half dead, had to drag people by the ankles to this mass grave. And she said some of them were 90% dead. They weren't even 100% dead. They were still breathing. So here are some images. Am I getting an echo? Do you hear an echo?
Yes.
I don't know how to stop that. Okay, I hope it stops. I don't know what that's from, but I tremble showing you these photos because obviously I don't have the permission of the people to show them, but these were real human beings. I'm showing them because they tell part of the story. No image can show what it was really like, but here are some things that were happening. When the British soldiers came in, they were so enraged, they were furious. There were, as I said, 80 SS in the camp to help with the turnover, and they pressed them into service, into carrying the dead and loading them onto trucks and to burying them. And here you see one of the mass pits that was dug out. It was 12 feet deep and 20 to 30 feet wide, 40 to 50 feet long. And you see Rabbi Leslie Hardman, who came in. He was a military chaplain. He came in with the British, and he is just so bereft and just so filled with sorrow at how people were being buried, and also exhausted from ministering to the survivors around the clock, day and night. He was really near a nervous breakdown. And this picture on the upper right reminds me of something else that my mom shared with me. And you see this girl here with a square cut out of the back of her coat. And remember that the people who were dumped in Bergen-Belsen in the winter and spring of 1945 these were already the survivors. They had evaded the gas chambers in Auschwitz. They survived labor camps. They survived death marches, and they were dumped here. And these were the strong ones, and they were dying so quickly. But this girl has a square cut out of the back of her coat, and they did this in a lot of the labor camps because they did not want anyone who tried to escape to really make it as an escapee. The square cut out of the back of their coats made them easily identifiable as halfling, as prisoners. And here on the bottom right, you see just some of the squalor, just an image that can't really show it. And here's some more. On the bottom right, here's an image that also reminded me of something my mom shared. She could talk about it more, but the British, when they first came in, remember, they were totally unprepared. Glenn Hughes was totally unprepared. He had medical units that were all tied up with the battles in Northwest Germany. It was very hard corralling help. So for the first couple of days, he had to leave. They left Hungarian guards in charge. And the inmates who were well enough, who knew where mounds of potatoes were buried, would run to them, and the Hungarian guards would shoot at them. But if they managed to scavenge some, as my mom did, they could find a means to cook them. And they were so my mom was doing this with her sister at one point. There's an anecdote about that in the book. But they were so inured to the stench and the sights that they were dead right there and behind them. So this is also really significant. This picture doesn't look like much. It's maybe a little blurry. It looks like squalor. You don't really understand what is exactly going on here, but these are what the British called the huts. It's where the inmates were put. In the horror camp where my mom was, there were two camps. There was Camp 1, which was the horror camp, which housed 41,000 prisoners. And then there was Camp 2, which housed more new arrivals who were sick and emaciated, but not as bad as here in the horror camp. And there were people suffering from every form of disease. At least 3 epidemics were raging, gastroenteritis and typhus and tuberculosis. And the British, the dead and the living, were together in these huts, which were absolutely just a mass of human excreta lined the floor. It was really hard for the soldiers to go in and try to administer to these people. So to relieve the overcrowding, they had some of the people who could still walk move out into tents. And so they set up a bunch of tentage on April 18th, 3 days after the liberation. And my mom was one of them, who was with 4 others in a tent. But she was expelled from the tent by one of the girls there, had to crawl back to the hut, and was beaten there by her fellow compatriots until she fell unconscious, which is really one of the things that drives my whole telling of this story. And the question behind the book is, how was my mom rescued? And that's how I really got deep into the liberation. So anyway, the distance matters. They were really close to each other. So the rescue operation. So how are they going to go about this? They didn't have that much manpower. They couldn't attend to each individual person. They had to sort of do it triage style, like factory style. So here you have men from the 11th Light Field Ambulance who are dressed in protective equipment, and they are going into the huts, and they are identifying who. A medic went in ahead of time to sort of identify who had a chance of surviving. And if someone was breathing and they looked like they could make it, he would mark their foreheads with like take chalk with a red cross. And of course, this was an emergency situation, and there were people who might have survived who were left to die, and there were people who had no chance who were taken to a makeshift hospital. It was just hard to make those snap judgments very quickly. And all kinds of things were happening on the ground. I just was listening to my aunt, who's also a survivor of Bergen-Belsen, who tells me that she found a piece of chalk on the floor and marked her own forehead, and all the girls were passing it around and marking their foreheads. So all kinds of things were happening. But what the British did was they put the inmates, they evacuated, they stripped them, and they took them in these, they called them contaminated ambulances, about 1.5 miles away to a cavalry stables that was transformed into what they called the human laundry. They set up 60 tables, and they pressed German nurses from the area into service, which freaked out some of the inmates that they were being handled by Germans, but there was no choice. There wasn't enough manpower. So they did this work supervised by British soldiers. There were 60 tables here. And after people were washed and dusted with DDT, they were put in clean blankets, put into a clean ambulance, and taken also about 1.5 miles to 2 miles away to a makeshift hospital complex. So just in terms of the logistics of this, can you imagine just where do you get, like, 30,000 clean blankets from? So everything was had to be done very quickly and with a lot of resourcefulness on the part of the rescuers. So here's some just approximate numbers, and I'm going to start reading from the bottom. There were 14,000 patients in the Glen Hughes Hospital, the largest such facility in Europe, on May 19th, 1945, a month after the liberation. Now, this was another thing that really drew me to Glen Hughes. Like, why was this largest hospital in Europe, and maybe anywhere in the world ever, named after this man? And that is because of his compassion and his warmth and what the survivors who were working with him saw in him. So they named the hospital for him. And eventually, fast forward a few years, 2,000 babies were born in the Glen Hughes Hospital. It took 2 weeks for the backlog of corpses to be buried. 500 former inmates died each day for a month after the liberation. It was like impossible for a whole month to stem the tide of death. People were so far gone. Only 361 British Army soldiers and medical personnel came to Bergen-Belsen on April 17th, 2 days after the liberation. Not enough manpower, but Glen Hughes was trying from wherever he could. 750 to 1,000 people were processed each day for over 3 weeks at the human laundry. 25,000 who were regarded as fit, they were able to walk up a couple of steps. They were transferred to a formerly Wehrmacht transit and rehabilitation barracks, which became like the seeds of the displaced persons camp. Now, it was weird because, of course, 25,000 were fit, but A lot of the fit became sick. They had to go to the hospital. People who were in the hospital who recovered could go to the transit camp. So 55 to 60,000 sick and dying prisoners were found in Bergen-Belsen at the time of its liberation. 2/3 were women, 1/3 men, and there were 400 to 500 children, which is its own story. And I'm not going to read the rest. It's about earlier. It's about Auschwitz. So the rescue relief efforts, of course, went on for a very long time. People were in the hospital for a very long time, but the rescue in terms of getting people out of the huts ended on May 21st. So here's Glenn Hughes. He gives the order for the last hut to be burned down. This is the last hut in Bergen-Belsen, excuse me. Last hut from which prisoners were evacuated. He would not allow the Union Jack, the British flag, to be hoisted on VE Day. They didn't celebrate VE Day on May 8th in Bergen-Belsen. He only wanted to have a celebration when the last hut was emptied, and it had to be burned down because of the typhus and the disease. And here you see a lot of the well-enough inmates and British soldiers are there to watch the event happen. And there was a nice speech that was given, and it was a ceremony worth remembering. And here is just a sign pointing to the Glenn Hughes Hospital. And here is the largest part of that hospital complex. And this is kind of interesting. There's this little country off the coast of Sri Lanka called the Maldives. And when they were celebrating the 50th anniversary of the end of World War II, they issued these commemorative stamps. And one of them is the burning down of the last hut in Bergen-Belsen. So this is the actual photograph with an effigy of Hitler being burned and the flag with the Iron Cross. And here is the stamp. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. So I did a little bit of a statistical analysis because I was just interested. So out of the 13,000 Jews who were deported from Siget to Auschwitz, we have here 174 who were sick, who were taken to Sweden from Bergen-Belsen after the war. Now, the Swedish government, they had their reasons, but really out of a very humanitarian gesture, they said they took in about 7,000 of the sickest survivors and their close family members and took them to Sweden to rehabilitate them, to put them on their feet. And of course, my mom was one of them. She was very, very sick after the war. And she, as she would say, she couldn't make a decision for herself. So she was one of them. So this is the numbers of people who survived Bergen-Belsen, who were from Siget, who arrived in Sweden. Now, there could have been people who survived Siget and who were in other places. There could have been people who survived Siget who wound up in Bergen-Belsen who didn't go to Sweden. But this sort of really, I think, is a sort of microcosm of the demographic picture of who had the best chances of surviving the war in a way. And of course, there were people who came to Sweden who died by the hundreds in Sweden. People were dying still. They were so sick. But you see, you had a very, very little chance of surviving if you were in your 40s or 50s. You had a better chance of surviving if you were in your 30s, and people in their 20s represented the largest group. And my mom, in red here, was one of the youngest. There was just really a few people younger than her, and her sister was born in 1928. So this is the first hospital my mom was taken to after the war in Sweden. It was a place called Katrina Home. And after quarantine, she was taken to this makeshift school where this doctor here, the second from the bottom of the right, really saved her life. It was the first time she got really individualized medical attention. Anyway, this is precious to me. It's also in the book. This is the first picture we have of my mom after the war. You could see that she has black and blue marks under her eyes. It's still, she hasn't healed completely from having been beaten. And we have no pictures from her childhood, nothing of her family, nothing from before the war. And in the epilogue, I have the opportunity to talk a little bit more about my mom becoming a young adult in Sweden. Here she is in her early 20s with her sister Elizabeth. They're young ladies. And here's my dad in a he was also a survivor. He is in the displaced persons camp here, and here's their wedding photo, and here's my mom today. Very proud of her. She's on this call. She speaks to groups, school groups all over the country, all over the world. And here's a picture of Glenn Hughes at Bergen-Belsen, and you can sort of see the seriousness in his eyes. And here he is in the years after. Another entire biography could be written about Glenn Hughes as a military leader. Here he is playing golf. He was a father figure of rugby football. There were many dimensions to his life, and I actually wrote a whole book about all these other things before I came to the realization that I had to tell a story, a short story over 1 year's time. And I really focused in the epilogue also on some of his deeds related to his experience, his watershed experience of liberating Bergen-Belsen and spending time in the DP camp there after the war was over. So very briefly, I'm going to tell you about a very chapter that my mother was not part of, because this was what happened after people stayed on in the Bergen-Belsen displaced persons camp. They had about 12,000 people. People came from all over. It was the largest DP camp. And it was part of what really moved Glenn Hughes when he saw all these things happening there. He didn't have to go there. He went almost every day after the war was over. While mourning incalculable losses, survivors, nearly all of whom had lost most of their relatives, formed a vibrant DP community. The devout and the secular, those who had lost faith and those who held fast to Jewish precepts, united around a common goal: to create a meaningful narrative of their sufferings by turning their sights to a Jewish homeland and to a future in which they could live normal lives. So I'm just going to show you some images. So the people who had been Zionist youth group leaders before the war, who survived, emerged as leaders. Here's Yassel Rosensaft, and they really mobilized people. Here's men from the Jewish Brigade in Palestine who came to try to make them into a political force, really fighting with the British over the right to emigrate to Palestine. And I should just mention that Glenn Hughes he became a Zionist. He was against the policies of British officialdom and supported the survivors. They had a theater in the DP camp where it was very cathartic. They talked about some of the experiences they had just lived through, losing so many people they loved. There was Organization for Rehabilitation and Training that came and tried to give people skills and put them on their feet so they should be employable. There was complex things happening. As the rabbi mentioned, his parents were both survivors and they had been married before the war. They didn't know the fate of their spouse. So here the Bergen-Belsen, the rabbis there had to make issue a ketubah that made some provisions for people who found out later they wanted to get married. They met someone that in the camp, in the DP camp, there were weddings practically every day. People were pairing up. It was an extraordinary moment in the history of the world that these people who had lost so much while still mourning wanted to rebuild. But this ketubah, special Bergen-Belsen ketubah, made provisions in case a spouse showed up after the war, they had to be provided for in some material way. So 420 men and 300 women who had been married and did not know the fates of their spouses were granted permission to remarry. So there was the largest baby boom in history in the displaced persons camp after the war. Far more women in their 20s, or they were in their 20s, early 30s, they were having babies than the surrounding population of German women. And they had a gun, a kindergarten, and it was just a way of a real rebirth. And here I'm just going to play a video, a very brief video, and that'll end my talk. This is of Rabbi Tzvi Asaria Herman Halfgott, who was he was a rabbi, and he was in a Yugoslavian POW camp. And as soon as the war was over, he came to help out at Bergen-Belsen.
אני עברתי יום יום מבלוק לבלוק לראות מי נפטר, להוציא אותם ולקבור אותם. אבל מה? הייתה פקודה מאנגלים, שאי אפשר קבר אחים לעשות בגלל המחלות, אלא קבר אחים. קבר אחים, כולם יחד. כלומר, שורה אחת, נגיד 20-30, על זה כן סיד, כן, ועל זה שוב כן איזה 30-20 וזה, כמו שהיה במחנה המוות הזה, איפה שאלפים כן. אבל יום אחד ניגשה אליי אישה, ואמרה לי, רבי, שמעתי היום שבבלוק הזה וזה, ביתי נפטרה. אז אמרתי, אז מה לעשות? אני רוצה קבר בשבילה, קבר יחיד. אמרתי, אבל זה בלתי אפשרי. אבל לכן אני מבקשת ממך. אז אמרתי לה, את יודעת מה? בלילה כשחיילים בדרך כלל, האנגלים, נמצאים במועדונים, אז אנחנו נקבור אותם. אנחנו נביא את הגופה, ואנחנו כן נקבור אותם. ובאמת, בלילה היא קמה מהמיטה, ואני ניסיתי מהר לקבור אותה, קדיש להגיד, ופתאום כשאני רציתי כבר סתום את הגולם, היא אומרת לי, רגע אחד רבי. והיא פנתה עם העיניים לשמיים ואמרה, ריבונו של עולם, ביידיש, אני מודה לך לזכות הגדולה, שנתת לי היום לקבור את ביתי במו ידיים. אמן. מרגע זה, אני מוכרח להגיד, נעשיתי אדם אחר. עשינו עכשיו את הכל על מנת לעזור לאנשים, כן, בדרך לחיים. ופה התחלנו לאשכול לדאוג, היו כמה ילדים לגן ילדים, ואחר כך להקים בית ספר, כן. פה עזרו לנו הרבה אנשי בריגדה שהגיעו כבר בזמן הזה, כן, לברגן-בלסן גם כן. והקמנו כבר גם כן תיאטרון, כן. חיים חדשים התחילו, כן. ופה אני עסקתי עד 48, כן. פה בתורה, חתונות התחילו, כן. ברית מילות, כן, וכו' וכו' וכו'. ואני לא צריך להדגיש כמה שאני הייתי מאושר. כל משפחה רצתה שבברית מילה שאני נתת לכולם חופה וקידושים שאני אחזיק את הילד. היום המאושר ביותר בחיים שלי היה בילד האלף כשאני החזקתי לידיו. הילד האלף.
So, yeah, that's my presentation. This was a sign that was erected at the time that the British liberated the camp. It's not there now. The camp is actually really, they did a really good job of a memorial and a museum there. And so it's worth visiting if you're in the neighborhood. But they were so angry at the time that they, British erected this sign that is kind of sarcastic. This is the site of the infamous Belsen concentration camp liberated by the British on 15 April 1945. 10,000 unburied dead were found here. Another 13,000 have since died. All of them victims of the German New Order in Europe and an example of Nazi Kultur. And if you're interested, I have a lot more. I have pictures and more about my protagonists on my website. Yeah, so that's my presentation, and my mom is here and I'm here. We're happy to take any questions.
Well, maybe you could introduce your mother, Ruth, if you could come on and say how you were involved in the writing of the book and helping your daughter, that would be great.
Thank you very much. Yes, I didn't have much to do. I was just telling my story as I remembered it, and my daughter had a tape recorder in her head, and she always remembered everything that I told her. She always used to ask a lot of questions from the time she was 6 or 7 years old. She used to come down I was sitting at night with my cup of coffee and the newspaper or a book, and she said she wanted to know, Ma, what did you do when you were 5 years old? What did you do when you were 6 years old? Throughout my teenage years, when she was still home, she asked always questions, and she recorded that. She never sat down with me to do a direct interview about my experience during the war or before the war. But she did a very nice job. I'm very proud of her because she really worked very hard for many years on this book. But it came out very nicely, and I'm proud of her.
So I'd like to start off with the first question. Perhaps there are some other questions that are being asked on chat, but I mentioned how fascinated I was with the book that I read from cover to cover. And I was amazed by the amount of detail, Ruth, that you gave, and by the amount of detail that Bernice remembered, because my parents did not give me that benefit, if you will, of information about their experiences in the camps. And so for me to read dialogue and experiences that were recalled was just absolutely fantastic, fascinating. How is it possible to record that much information about one person? And did you know that you wanted to write a book about it when you were so young? Or how is it that you, Bernice, that you felt that this information would one day be so valuable for people to have?
I stayed away for many years, for many decades, about writing about anyone in my own family. In fact, I wrote a book that was published in 2004 about 7 other Holocaust survivors. It wasn't, I never thought I would write a book about my mom. Honestly, it was very organic between us. I was able to write the book ultimately because of our relationship and because she never made me feel afraid to ask. There's a lot of second generation who don't want to take their parents back to such a painful place. And I understand that. And I've felt that sometimes too. And, but she was able, it's really the strength of her personality that she was able even to tell me very sad things. And always never making me feel like I couldn't ask. She was always like, ask me anything. And she would answer every time. And it was sort of built because I didn't hear the stories just once or twice. I heard them every couple of years, and we would talk very organically. I could always ask her. And finally, when I did decide to write her story and tell the Brigadier's story at the same time, I was so lucky to have her with me. I could call her up or send her an email and try to take her back to a particular place and say, you know, when you were on the death march, what were you wearing, or what did you have? And she would always answer me as best she could. The only question she couldn't answer, which was what happened after she fell unconscious in Bergen-Belsen. And that's what drove the book, because that was like the missing piece. Like everything else she was very aware of. She, you know, was aware of certain things that happened, and she could tell me after, but it was hazy on the rescue.
Mm-hmm. And Ruth, you didn't mind telling the story a lot. You felt it was very important for your daughter to know.
Yes.
The story. And did you think that it might hurt her or emotionally? Was it difficult for you or for her?
No, it wasn't difficult, and I think she was a very strong girl. I didn't worry about her getting nightmares, because the sad things that I told her, that was when she was a little bit older, not when she was very young. And she just thought that she felt sorry for me that I had to go through so much, and losing my parents. She didn't have any grandparents. And also I told her some very sad stories, because when I was put in the rehab in the hospital bed, I was put in the hospital in a room with 12 beds. 11 girls died every day, and they brought in another 11 dying. So for 3 weeks, my sister was looking all over for me in Bergen-Belsen, and she couldn't find me. During that time, I just wanted to live. I knew my father told me that I'm a strong girl, I'm going to make it. I couldn't disappoint him. I had to live to survive, and I wanted to live for my sister, because if I would have died then, like the other girls, then she would be all alone in the world. And I didn't want to die. And subconsciously, I just wanted to live. So finally, when she found me after 3 weeks, she was very happy, but I don't know if I was happy because I was semi-conscious most of the time in the hospital there. But she went to the village, brought scallions, and I started to eat the scallions, and it gave me an appetite, and I was getting stronger. I could even crawl down from my bed and take the food from the night tables that other girls didn't touch because they died during the night. And one day when the nurse comes in and she sees me, I was sitting up in bed, she says, "You are so lucky you survived, but all those other girls died in this room." And I said, "How lucky can I be? How lucky am I? I lost my parents, I lost my home, I lost all my relatives, except for my sister, and I lost my health." I just felt so sorry for myself because I was still very sick. And that was a very, very sad. Even after we came to Sweden, my best friend died a year after we came to Sweden from tuberculosis. And I suffered a lot. I had to go from one sanatorium to another sanatorium, and I had many relapses in Sweden. Life wasn't like you're very happy the war is over and now you can celebrate. It wasn't like that for survivors of the Holocaust.
And then how soon after did you meet your husband?
Quite late, because that's a whole story in itself. I was 24 years old when it so happened that my sister got married, and she married to a guy who had a brother who was already in the United States, and a brother can take out a brother. So my sister had to leave me with her husband to come to the United States, and we were very sad that we are going to be separated again. And my sister said to me, "Don't worry, within a year's time, I'm going to bring you to America also." And I thought, that's a pipe dream. How is she going to get me to America? My Romanian quota is very bad. And also, I had tuberculosis. They didn't let people in with tuberculosis in the United States. I had several relapses in Sweden. I was working at different places and it was stressful, so I got a relapse, wound up in the hospital and rehab for years. So how is she going to get me to America? So anyway, when she came here with her husband, she went to a Purim party a couple of months after she arrived here, and she met some girls that we were in the same concentration camp together. And they started to talk, and they remembered me, and they asked them how I was. And my sister took out a picture and showed them how I was doing. I was doing pretty good at that point. And they said they have a single brother. Maybe we could start writing to each other. So my sister gave my address to the girls. They gave it to their brother, and we started to write. And I was supposed to come to Canada. Maybe that would have been easier for a Romanian born. And we wrote for about six months to each other. And I was refused to come to Canada also. So I wrote a very sad letter, and my sister went over to my future husband, because at that point we knew that we were meant for each other. He was born in Czechoslovakia and I was born in Romania, but we came from similar backgrounds and we had similar goals because of our letter writing. We found out about that. And my sister went over with my brother-in-law and said, "Listen, you are already an American citizen. You work very hard. You never took a vacation. Why don't you go to Sweden, America, or that?" And that's the way I came to the United States, and this is the best country. He came to marry me in Sweden in December of 1954. And of course, we are supposed to travel in Europe a little bit, but the marriage license got lost, and he had to leave because he had to go back he had a business to take care of. And he left me behind in Sweden, and we were writing to each other every single day. And I was very sad that I couldn't come with him together. So finally in February, he had to take a lawyer to find the marriage license and all the papers. And I arrived in this country in April 1st or April 2nd. It was a very hot day here, but I'm very happy that I came here. I had 58 wonderful years with my husband. He was the best husband and the best father also. We were very happy to be together. I am lucky to be alive, and I'm lucky. I thank God every day that I'm feeling well, and I speak a lot on Zoom nowadays, also in person. I'm going to this Sunday, next Sunday, I'm going to speak in person to names, not numbers. I do a lot of Zoom with schools, children, and I'm glad I can do it. I am happy to be in this country. By now I have 2 daughters, 3 grandchildren, and 5 great-grandchildren, and I couldn't be happier. Thank you very much for listening to my story.
Oh, Kanai Nahara, it's a great story. And I think that together you make a great partnership, and the book is absolutely fantastic. So I want to introduce everyone to Manny Sachs, who's a member of our congregation and who's the one that put this program together. So Manny, if you could introduce yourself, unmute yourself, and perhaps you have a question for Bernice or for Ruth. Manny, you have to unmute yourself.
If everybody wants to buy this book, you probably know about it, most of you. It's a wonderful book. It's written by my daughter, and she did a very good job. She worked 15 years on this book while she was working, and she worked nights to finish it. Thank you very much for listening to me.
You have an agent there. I read the book. It's
Yeah,
fascinating. I read it from cover to cover.
You can get that to a good deal. Bernice, you can tell them how to get a good deal.
We sent that out, Ruth. We sent it out to everybody.
Thank
Manny.
you very much.
I was moved incredibly by your presentation when my daughter Shannon invited me to 3G NYC to hear you speak, Bernice and Ruth. My mother, like the rabbi's mother, was a survivor of Bergen-Belsen. We spoke about this, and you know, you said in your book, you know, what words describe, there are no words to describe incredible and comprehensible what happened. I look at it this way. How about just dying? Because that's exactly what life was there at Bergen-Belsen. Both my parents never spoke about it. I got a little information from my mom, but my mom said to me, she left these indelible words on my mind and in my heart. And she said, Mendel, she said, who will believe what we endured? I just listened then. I had no answer then. However, today my opinion is, ultimately, we are the victors. We are here because of them. It's us to remember, to help us remember, and never to forget. And it's auspicious that we have you with us, Ruth and Bernice, and because this Thursday, coming April 15th, is the 76th anniversary of the liberation. Ruth, so lange jung, may you have many blessed memories, many years to come. And I apologize I couldn't get on earlier, technical difficulties. I thank Murphy for that. But I just want to conclude by thanking Congregation B'nai Jeshurun, who joined us, Rabbi Sam Castell, my dear friend Sandra Conrad, who's the president, and Dan Glassman, who worked behind the scenes to bring the synagogue together to join us on this auspicious moment and this auspicious anniversary. So thank you very much. Yasha Koach, Yasha Koach, Yasha Koach.
Thank you very much.
Right, so Manny, thank you, Manny. Manny brought up a point that is a question that was given to us in chat, and that has to do with the emotional part of the memories, whether or not, Ruth, you suffer, as I know my mother did as well, from nightmares. So how much of those early experiences do you still recollect, and how much of it were you able to put behind you?
Every time before I have to speak to a group of students, the night before I practically cannot sleep because I think through all the things that I went through. And there was a lot of it because losing my parents and the rest of my family in Auschwitz, and later on the death march. And I remember, and I don't have really nightmares anymore. I used to have them early on in my life when I was sick and worrying about being caught by the Russians, because I didn't want to go back to my hometown anymore because I heard very bad rumors about what the Russians were doing. Before that, of course, when I lived in my hometown, we were hoping the Russians will come and liberate us before the Germans came in, because we lived very close to the Russian border in Siget. But no, I don't, thank God I don't suffer from any.
Mhm. I know that my mother, who lost two infants in the camp, suffered from those losses more than anything else. And she would have to take a little schluck of whiskey every night in order to be able to go to sleep. So everybody dealt with it in different ways. And I think that the last question to ask is, does the telling of your story over and over again, in the recording of the book and in the talks that you give to people that come through Glen Cove and the schools that you talk to, does it help you in any way go through, put the past behind you? Does it make it easier for you? Is it therapy for you?
I think it is. It's very important for me. I feel it's important for me to talk about it because it's my sacred duty to speak what happened to all of the Jews during the war, of all the 6 million who were killed. And also my father, the last words that he gave me when we were in the cattle cars were, "You are a strong girl, you are going to make it, and you are going to speak about it." And that's why I have to talk. I don't have nightmares. Like I said, I have bad nights before I have to speak the next day. But for example, yesterday I was three times on Zoom with people. And I think it's good for me to speak because I feel everybody has to know it shouldn't happen again. We have to talk about the Holocaust. It shouldn't be forgotten. We have to remember it for always, because if we don't remember it, it might happen again. Right now, we know there are lots of anti-Semitism again all over the world, also here in the United States, and we have to be aware of it and speak up anytime we see some discrimination or bad things going on. We have to be nice to other people and not to let anybody get away with lies like the Holocaust deniers.
Well, thank you. Thank you both so much. Bernice, your book was incredible. And thank you for bringing to us a part of history that perhaps most of us were not familiar with in as much detail as you brought about in the liberation of the camps and the DP. And your own, both your stories are for us very heartwarming. And we very much appreciate you being here this evening to join us.
Thank you.
Thank
so
you very
much.
much.
Thank you. And as usual, when we end a program of such, we want to say a Kel Mole, a prayer to pray for the peace of the souls of all of those who were lost in Bergen-Belsen and throughout the horrors of Nazis. And so we'd like to ask Cantor Edry if he could please come aboard, and then we'll have Ellen Steinberg read her beautiful poem, prayer that she wrote as a translation for the Kel Mole. So Cantor Edry, if we could ask you to unmute yourself.
Okay, I think I did.
Good, you're on.
Okay. I think we rise at this point. Eile male rachamim, shochein bamrumim, hametzei menucha nechona, תחת כנפי השכינה, במעלות קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים, את נשמות כל אחינו ואחיותינו שנפלו, שנהרגו ונשחטו בשואה, במלחמת העולם השנייה. בגן עדן תהא מנוחתם, אנא בעל הרחמים, תסתירם בסתר כנפיך לעולמים, וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמותיהם. אדוני הוא נחלתם, וינוחו בשלום על משכבם, ונאמר אמן.
Amen.
Amen.
Ellen, if we could please invite you to read.
On this Friday night, when we commemorate Yom Hashoah, we pray for the souls of friends, neighbors, and relatives who experienced the horrors of the Holocaust. May each of their memories be for a blessing. And may we never forget that our loved ones endured suffering which no person should be subjected. They were each unique and special human beings with full lives whose demise diminished the world's humanity. Their souls continue to speak to us so that we may learn not to repeat the mistakes of the past and renew our dedication to the ideals of liberty that inspire us to make this country and this world a better place, as they would have done had they survived. They died so that we could live. O Lord, teach us and our children how to remember and never forget. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you so much for your beautiful words, and for Cantor Edry, for the Kale Mully, and for all of you for joining us for this very special program. And as we mentioned, we are going to segue now into our actual service. And so just to welcome members of B'nai Jeshurun and others who have come here to join us for the service. We most appreciate your being here as well. We will share a PDF of the service that we have, so you will be able to follow the Sidur that we use, called Sidur Chaverim Kol Yisrael. It's a nice book that is very appropriate for a Zoom service in particular. So our service may be a little bit different from the one that you're familiar with, but we hope that you will find it meaningful as well. And we are going to now invite Cheryl Weisberg for a moment to begin, but I want to light the candles. Candle lighting is 7-11, so we're pretty close to that. And I have my electric lights. So Bonnie, if you want to put up the PDF of the service, we can light the candles. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Shabbat. Lahadlik ner shel Shabbat. So we ask you to make this beautiful light shine into your homes and into your hearts. So the circle that we draw around it to bring that warmth and the beauty of Shabbat into our lives, to give us calm and serenity in a very turbulent world. And as we experience now and commemorate so many stories that bring to mind the suffering in the world, we find this little island of Shabbat, the space, so that we can find menucha, we can find calm and contentment. And to all of you, we want to wish you peace, shalom, wherever you are. So now we're going to ask Cheryl to chant for us Shalom Aleichem, and as everyone is muted, so we don't mind if your lips move along with us as we go through the service.
Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hasharetz, Malachei Elyon, Mi Melech Malachei Hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Boachem l'shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon. Mi Melech Malachei Hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Barchuni l'shalom, Malachei hashalom, Malachei elyon. Mi melech Malachei hamlachim hakadosh baruch hu. Seitchem l'shalom, Malachei hashalom, Malachei elyon. Mi melech Malachei hamlachim hakadosh baruch hu.
So whether you're coming or whether you're going, wherever you are, may peace be with you. We'll begin our services as it's traditional to do for Kabbalat Shabbat, to receive the Sabbath. And we're to receive the Sabbath, of course, in a very joyous mood. And that's why we start with Psalm 95, because it says, L'chu niranana, come everybody, let's be happy, let's give praise and appreciation that Shabbat is here and we can experience it. So L'chu niranana.
Lechu niranina, lechu niranina, lechu niranina, ladonai. Lechu niranina, lechu niranina, lechu niranina, ladonai. Naria, naria, litzur yishenu, nikadma fanav b'todah. Naria, naria, litzor yishenu, bizmirot naria lo, lechu niranina, lechu niranina, lechu niranina, ladonai, lechu niranina, lechu niranina, lechu niranina, ladonai, lai, lai, lai. Lai la lai la 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 lai la lai la la lai 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 la 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 lai la 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 lai la lai la 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 lai la lai la 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 lai 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 la lai lai lai.
So if we're happy, then we want to sing a new song. And therefore, Psalm 96 is telling us, Shiru l'Hashem shir chadash, sing to Adonai a new song, sing to Adonai all the earth.
Shiru l'Adonai, shiru shir chadash, shiru l'Adonai kol haaretz. Shiru l'Adonai, shiru shir chadash, shiru l'Adonai kol haaretz. Shiru l'Adonai baruch shemo, basru miyom liyom yeshuato. Shiru l'Adonai baruch shemo, basru miyom liyom yeshuato. Lai 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 lai. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la.
And if we're happy, then we want the whole world to be happy. So at the bottom of the page, we sing Yismechu Hashamayim, let the heavens be glad and the earth rejoice, let the sea roar and all that fills it.
Yismechu Hashamayim, Yismechu Hashamayim, Yismechu Hashamayim, v'tagel haaretz. Yismechu Hashamayim, Yismechu Hashamayim, Yismechu Hashamayim, v'tagel haaretz. Yiram hayam, Yiram hayam, Yiram hayam umlo'o. Yiram hayam, Yiram hayam, Yiram hayam umlo'o. Yismechu Hashamayim, Yismechu Hashamayim, Yismechu Hashamayim, v'tagel haaretz.
And now we're going to read responsively under the title, How Wise is Our Tradition? How wise is our tradition? Because it gives us this beautiful Shabbat in an environment with friends that we can recite and sing praises to our God and give appreciation. So how wise is our tradition to command us to take time to feel joy?
How wise is our tradition to command us to study Torah, and what joy it is to be guided by her words.
How wise is our tradition to command us to seek rest on Shabbat, and what joy it is for our souls to be refreshed.
How wise is our tradition to command us to kindle Shabbat candles, and what joy it is to marvel in their light.
How wise is our tradition to command us to be mindful of Shabbat, and what joy it is to remember God's holiness.
Light is sown for the righteous, joy for those who are upright.
The righteous will rejoice in Adonai, give thanks, and remember God's holiness. And we're going to continue now with Psalm 98. And we ask if you had any instruments at your hand with whatever they are, you would take these instruments and you would sing about the beauty of Shabbat, sing out to Adonai, all the earth, break out, exult, and let's make music. Make music to Adonai with the lyre and the sound of music, with trumpets and the sound of the horns. Sing out before the ruler Adonai.
Zamru Adonai bechinor, bechinor v'kol zimra, b'chatzotzrot v'kol shofar, hariu lifnei HaMelech Adonai. Yiram hayam umlo'o, tevel v'yoshveva, neharot yimcha uchaf, yachad harim yiranenu, lifnei Adonai kiva, lishpot haaretz, yishpot tevel b'tzedek, ve'amim b'meisharim. Yiram hayam umlo'o, tevel v'yoshveva, neharot yimcha uchaf, yachad harim yiranenu.
And again, we're going to read responsively the wonder of life. Sing a new song to God, give thanks for the wonders that God has performed.
When we are trapped in narrow places, yet find strength to move forward with confidence and trust.
When we could look the other way and take a chance to reach out to one another with openness and compassion.
When we experience great pain or sorrow, yet find light in the midst of darkness.
When we recognize the wonder of life, ordinary moments become sacred. And to help us in thinking of those wondrous things in the universe and those wondrous moments that happen and God's power in the universe, we turn now to Psalm 29 and we chant Mizmor LeDavid.
Mizmor LeDavid, Havul Adonai bnei Elim, Havul Adonai kavod va'oz, Havul Adonai kavod shemo, Hishtachavu Adonai behadrat kodesh, Kol Adonai al hamayim, El hakavod hirim, Adonai al mayim rabim, Kol Adonai ba'koach, Kol Adonai behadar, Kol Adonai shover arazim, Vaishaber Adonai etzar zehalvanon, Vayarkitem kemo egel, Levanon v'siryon kemo venre'emim. Kol Adonai chotzev lahavot esh, Kol Adonai yachil midbar, Yachil Adonai midbar kadesh, Kol Adonai yecholel ayalot, Vayechesof ya'arot, uvhechalo kulo omer kavod, Adonai lamabu yashav, Vayeshev Adonai melech leolam, Adonai oz liamo yitain, Adonai yivarech et amo b'shalom.
And again, we'll read responsively under so many ways to pray, because we know we all come from different traditions. We all have different melodies and different ways of presenting our prayers, and that just makes us that much more richer. So there are so many ways to pray, so many doors that open our minds to greater understanding, so many paths that open our hearts to greater caring.
Ours is a tradition which recognizes the infinite manifestations of the divine in the miracles of nature and the sanctity of deeds.
Ours is a tradition which calls us to an encounter with the divine, to seek the signs of transcendence in the commonplace, to seek holiness through intimacy. And to give us that sense of intimacy, the quality of the beauty of the Sabbath, we use as a metaphor that the Sabbath is, Shabbat is like a queen, that she is decked out so beautifully and gracefully, and we invite her to come into our sanctuary, into our homes, and to teach us about the beauty of the Sabbath so that beauty radiates everywhere. And so we turn to Lecha Dodi, come my beloved, let's go out to meet the bride. Let us welcome the presence of the Sabbath, and we'll invite Mark Hirsch to lead us in the first two and the last two verses.
Achol Dodi lekras kala, Shabbat nikabela, Achol Dodi lekras kala, Shabbat nikabela. Shamor v'zichur b'dibur echad, Ishmianu elam yachad, Adonai echad, U'shemo echad, L'semo seferes felisi la. L'chol dodi l'kras kala, P'nei Shabbat nikabela. L'chol dodi l'kras kala, P'nei Shabbat nikabela. L'kras Shabbat l'chuven elcha, Ki makor habracha, Erosh midedem nisucha, Sof b'sheva b'shava tila. L'chol dodi l'kras kala, P'nei Shabbat nikabela. L'chol dodi l'kras kala, P'nei Shabbat nikabela. Yominu smo tifroti, yes Adonai taritzi, hayadish ben paritzi, v'nismachav v'nagila. L'chol dodi l'kras kala, P'nei Shabbat nikabela. L'chol dodi l'kras kala, P'nei Shabbat nikabela. O'i v'shalom teres bala, am v'savcho v'tzola, tochem unei am sugala, b'wichala. L'chol dodi l'kras kala, P'nei Shabbat nikabela. L'chol dodi l'kras kala, P'nei Shabbat nikabela.
Thank you, Mark. We continue now with the special psalm for the Sabbath day, Psalm 92. A psalm, a song for the Sabbath day. It is good to give thanks to Adonai, to sing to your name most high.
Mizmor shir liyom haShabbat, Mizmor shir liyom haShabbat, Mizmor shir, Mizmor shir, Mizmor shir liyom haShabbat, haShabbat. Tov, 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 tov lahodod ladonai, ulizamer l'shimcha elyon. Tov lehodod ladonai, tov, 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 tov lehodod ladonai, ulizamer l'shimcha elyon, tov lehodod ladonai. Ale asor v'ale nobel, ale higayon bechinor, ale asor v'ale nobel, tov lehodod ladonai, tov, 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 tov lehodod ladonai, ulizamer l'shimcha elyon, tov lehodol Adonai.
And the conclusion of the prayer on top of page 14, the righteous like the date palm will flower, like a cedar in Lebanon, they will flourish, planted in the house of Adonai, in the courtyards of our God will they flower.
Tzadik katamar yifrach yifrach, tzadik katamar yifrach, tzadik katamar yifrach yifrach, tzadik katamar yifrach. Ke'erez bavanon yiske, ke'erez bavanon yiske, ke'erez bavanon yiske, yiske. Ke'erez bavanon yiske, ke'erez bavanon yiske, ke'erez bavanon yiske, yiske. Shetulim beveit Adonai, bechatzrot Eloheinu yafrichu, o yenuvun b'seva, tishenim v'ra'nanim yiyu. Shetulim beveit Adonai, bechatzrot Eloheinu yafrichu, lehagid ki ashar Adonai, suri v'lo avlatabo.
We now come to the mourner's Kaddish, and we invite anyone who is reciting Kaddish to join us. Yitgadal v'yitkadash Shemei Rabbah, v'yalamad yivarach Yerutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayei d'chol Beit Yisrael, ba'agala u'bizman kariv v'imaru. Amen. Yehei Shemei Rabbah v'varach, li'alam u'almei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpoar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yidaleh v'yithalal shemei d'kodesha b'richu le'elam min kol birchatah v'shiratah tushbachatah v'nechemata da amiran ba'alma v'imaru. Amen. Yehei shlama rabbah min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imaru. Amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imaru. Amen. I'd like to just take a moment to talk about the mood and the feeling that a lot of us have, that we're vacillating between being depressed and sad for so many different kinds of reasons, and on the other hand, very optimistic and hopeful, as we as a Jewish people are. And we take these days between Passover and Shavuot, and we actually use each of the days that we count, the 49 days, till the 50th day of Shavuot, for a very special purpose. And if Bonnie can put up the PDF, if that will work, I would like to give you an example of a very beautiful strategy that the Kabbalists came up with, that we should consider each day in order to reflect on ourselves and to see whether or not by the time we get to Shavuot, are we really in a proper state of mind? Are we in a balanced state of mind in order to receive the Torah? Because we come out of Egypt, we're free, all right, but what do we do with that freedom? So it's not unbridled freedom that we're celebrating. Of course, it's a freedom that will ultimately give us the Torah, so we have a guide, so we know how to live our lives, and we know what we believe in, and therefore we worship our God in the way that we would like, and we live good lives. But to get to that point, the Kabbalists suggested that we take each week and then each day of the week, and we look at it to consider what mood or what feeling or what strategy we might have to living a good life. So let me just take for you one particular example. So today would be the 6th day last week, the 13th day of counting the Omer for today. So if you look at day 6, and you will see it stands for one of the Sefirot, one of the energy forces that are in the universe, and that correspond to the parts of our body, in fact. And you will see this is called Yesod, or foundation, or loyalty. So let's just say right now, this is the foundation of your value system. What if I asked you, what do you consider to be the structure, the underlying foundation of what you believe. And so on the right side, you'll take the day of the week. Now we were week 1, now we're week 2. And if you look at week 1 in particular, you will see that one of those sefirot, one of those qualities is chesed, kindness. So what kind of person should you be? If you are to be a kind person, all of us consider ourselves kind. It's take the extreme. Can you be kind under any situation? Can you be ultimately kind to everyone? Because that will mean that therefore you're not thinking about yourself. If you take it to its limit and you say, yes, I'm a kind person, I am filled with chesed. I want to give as much as I can to others, and I want to help others as much as I can. And you were to continue that particular train of thought, which is of course wonderful, and make that the ultimate foundation of your being. How far can you carry that to the extreme? And you will find, of course, that it's very difficult to do so, because if you give everything you have to someone else, then what will you have left? So week number 2 asks you to consider the opposite of that. So if you are to be disciplined and strict with your way you behave your life, and you are to draw that kind of strength so that you're actually able to say no to someone or no to something in your life because you know it's not good, and you end up then on the extreme saying no to everything, which there are people who are both ways, people who are ultimately very giving, and then there are always people who say no to whatever you say, and it doesn't really matter what it is. So on the one hand, you want to be kind. On the other hand, you want to be disciplined so that you can master yourself under different kinds of situations. You don't want to be gullible, yet you want to be a giving individual. So the third week, of course, will ask us to blend these two to come up with our own particular scheme. So even though these are abstract concepts, the way in which you interpret them and how you balance them in your life is going to be unique and individualistic. So here's week number 3, Tiferet, or beauty, harmony. How can you take these particular different poles of kindness, of chesed and gevurah? How are you going to blend these two so that you come out with a human being who's well-rounded and who can give and receive, and do so in such a way that you feel that you live a balanced life, that you haven't been taken advantage of, and yet you're able to give as much of yourself as you can. So these are the days that are given to us to contemplate, to reflect, and to think about these kinds of situations that we know we're balancing now with the Yom HaShoah, which we are commemorating, and then of course Yom HaZikaron, to remember the fallen soldiers, and then right away to go to the other extreme and to revel in Yom HaAtzmaut and be happy for that occasion. So we as a people are doing a lot of balancing between these days of Pesach and Shavuot, and the Kabbalists would invite you to think each day and use each day wisely to reflect on where you are in life and how you feel at this particular moment. So we're going now to continue our service and with the chanting of Baruch Hu. So now we come to the official Arvit part of the service, and where we're going to return to the PDF for the service. We'll wait for that to appear for Arvit, in which time we're going to chant the Baruch Hu. And Cheryl, I think you could start that. Everybody knows the Baruch Hu without a PDF.
Lie, 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 lie. Lie, 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 lie. Lie, 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 lie. Lie, 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 lie. Lie, 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 lie. Lie, la, 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 lie, lie. Lie, la, lie, 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 lie. Lie, la, lie, 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 lie. Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMivorach.
Baruch Adonai Avarach Leolam Vahed.
Baruch Adonai HaMivorach, HaMivorach Leolam
And for the next blessing, blessed are you, Adonai, the blessed one. Blessed be Adonai, the blessed one forever and ever. You bring on the evening. Blessed are you, our eternal God, ruler of the universe, who completed acts of creation on the seventh day and called it a pleasure, your holy Sabbath. You instituted rest for the people Israel from evening to evening. With pleasure you roll light from darkness and darkness from light. Blessed are you, our eternal God, who brings on the evening. And now we're going to chant Ahavat Olam. This is the blessing that comes right before the Shema to express our appreciation to God for giving us the Torah, because the Torah now becomes the source, the strength of our lives, to which we are wholly dedicated. Ahavat Olam.
Ahavat Olam, Beit Yisrael, Amcha ahavta, Amcha ahavta, Torah umitzvot, Chukim umishpatim, Otanu limadita, Otanu limadita. Al kein Adonai Eloheinu b'shachbinu uvkumenu nasiach bechukecha v'nismach b'divrei toratecha uvmitzvotecha li'olam va'ed ki hem chayenu v'orech yameinu uvahem nege yomam v'layla nege yomam v'layla ve'ahavatecha al tasir mimenu li'olamim Baruch atah Adonai Ohev Amo Yisrael, Ohev Amo Yisrael. Amen.
Amen. And together now we'll chant the Shema and then we'll recite the V'ahavta. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha uv'chol nafshecha uv'chol me'odecha ve'hayu hadvarim ha'eleh asher anochi mitzavcha hayom al levavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam v'shivtecha b'veitecha uvlechtecha b'derech uv'shachbecha uv'kumecha ukshartam liot al yadecha v'hayu l'totafot bein einecha uchtabtam al mezuzot beitecha uvisharecha.
And you are to love Adonai, your God, with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. These words that I command you today shall be upon your heart. You should teach them to your children, speaking of them when you sit in your house and when you go on your way, when you lie down and when you rise up. Bind them as a sign upon your hand and let them be a symbol between your eyes. Write them upon the doorposts of your house and upon your gates. אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים, אני אדוני אלוהיכם.
Adonai Elohechem emet.
And now comes a blessing that follows the Shema. We've said how much we believe in the one God, and therefore we also say emet ve'amunah. True and reliable is all this. We are certain that you are Adonai, our God, and there are no others, and we are Israel, your people.
Emet ve'emuna kol zot. Emet ve'emuna kol zot. Emet ve'emuna, emet ve'emuna, emet ve'emuna kol zot. Ve'kayam aleinu, ki hu Adonai Eloheinu, v'yein zulato. Emet ve'emuna kol zot. Emet ve'emuna kol zot. Emet ve'emuna, emet ve'emuna, emet ve'emuna kol zot.
We continue now with a bridge to redemption that recalls, again, the Passover story, if you will, of the role that Moshe and Miriam played in bringing us through the narrow straits that we experienced. And therefore, we want to pay homage to them and talk about the powers of God in bringing that out. So we read responsibly under the category, release us, so that we are asked to be taken out and our paths in life widened. Adonai, God of the outstretched hand, who brought our ancestors out of confinement in Egypt, release all those bodily confined for the pursuit of justice.
Release us from the prisons and the calluses we have constructed around our hearts.
Release our hands from the shackles we have placed on them and guide them to their work.
Release our minds from the deceptions in which they are imprisoned. Remove exhaustion from our eyelids and bodies. Release our spirits from terror and fear.
Renew us that we may be renewed. Set us on our journey for the land we are to enter. So we continue now in the Hebrew in the middle of the page, Umalchuto b'ratzon.
Umalchuto b'ratzon kiblu aleihem Moshe u'Miriam uvnei Yisrael lecha anu shira besimcha rabba v'yamru chulam mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai mi kamocha nedar b'kodesh Nora tehilot osef ele malchutecha ra'uvanecha bokei hayam lifnei Moshe ze'eli anu v'yamru Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed v'ne'emar ki fad Adonai et Yaakov ugalo miyad chazak mimenu Baruch atah Adonai Ga'al Yisrael. Amen.
Blessed are you, Adonai, who has redeemed Israel. We now will read the beautiful prayer Hashkivenu, and we'll ask Bonnie to please read it for us in English.
Lay us down, Adonai our God, in peace, and awaken us, our ruler, to life, and spread over us your sukkah of peace, and help us with your good counsel, and save us for the sake of your name. Shield us and remove from us enemy, disease, and sword, and hunger, and sorrow, and remove the evil forces from before us and from behind us, and in the shadow of your wings shelter us. For God, you watch over us and rescue us. For God, you are a gracious and merciful ruler. Watch over our going and coming for life and for peace from now until forever, and spread over us your sukkah of peace. Blessed are you, Adonai, the one who spreads a sukkah of peace over us and over all your people Israel and over Jerusalem.
Amen. And now for the Hebrew, U'shemor Tzeiteinu.
Ushmor Tzeiteinu uvoenu lechayim u'shalom me'ata v'ad olam ufros aleinu sukat shlomecha Baruch atah Adonai haporei sukat shalom aleinu v'al kol amo Yisrael v'al Yerushalayim. Amen.
We continue with the prayer B'Shamru, familiar to most of us. It's excerpted from the Torah. It gives us the reason why we observe Shabbat. because God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh.
Vishamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat lasod et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam. Vishamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat lasod et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam. Beini uvein b'nei Yisrael, oti le'olam, oti le'olam, oti le'olam. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat lasod et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam. Ki sheshet yamim Asa Adonai, et hashamayim, v'et haaretz, v'shamru, v'nei Yisrael, et hashabat, lasod, et hashabat, ledorotam berit olam. Uvayom hashvi'i, Shabbat ba'inafash, Shabbat ba'inafash, Shabbat ba'inafash, v'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat lasod et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam.
And the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath to make the Sabbath for their generations as an eternal covenant. Between me and the children of Israel, it is a sign for all eternity, since for 6 days Adonai made the heavens and the earth, and on the seventh day God rested and was refreshed. We continue now with the Chatzi Kaddish, the bridge between the section we have just finished and the Amidah, which is about to follow.
Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah ve'alma divrach yirutei ve'amlich malchutei v'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chayetecho beit Yisrael bagala uv'izman kariv v'imru amen Yehei shmei Rabbah mevorach L'olam ulal me'almaya yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yitaleh v'yithalal shemei tekudusha brichu le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbichata v'nechemata Damiran bi'alma v'imru amen.
Amen. And now we're going to begin the Amidah. We will chant the Avot and the Imahot in the beginning, and then we will translate the rest in English.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avoteinu v'Imoteinu Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor, V'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, V'Konei Hakol, V'Zocher Chastei Avot, V'Imahot, Umevi Goel Livnei V'Nehem, L'ma'an shemo b'ahava, melech ozer u'moshia u'magen u'foked. Baruch atah Adonai, magen Avraham u'foked Sarah. Atah gibor le'olam Adonai, mechaye metim atah rab lehoshia. Mechalkel chayim bechesed, Mechaye meitim berachamim rabim, somech noflim v'rofei cholim, umatir asurim, umkayem emunato, Lishene afar, Micha mocha ba'al gevurot, Umido melach, Melech meitum chayeh, Umatzmiach Yeshua, V'ne'eman atah lahachayot meitim, Baruch atah Adonai, Mechayeh hametim.
You sanctified the seventh day for your name's sake, the completion of the creation of heaven and earth. You blessed it above all the days and made it holy above all the festivals. And thus it is written in your Torah, the heavens and the earth were completed and all their forces. On the seventh day, God completed the work that God had been doing, and God ceased on the seventh day from all the work that God had been doing. God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, for on it God ceased from all the work in creation that God had done. Our God and God of our ancestors, be pleased with our rest. Make us holy with your commandments and give us our share in your Torah. Satisfy us with your goodness, make us rejoice in your deliverance, and purify our hearts to serve you in truth. Give us as our inheritance, Adonai our God, in love and in desire your holy Sabbath, and on it may rest Israel, who sanctify your name. Blessed are you, Adonai, who makes the Sabbath holy. Receive our prayers, be pleased, Adonai our God, with your people Israel and with their prayers, and restore service for the sanctuary in your temple, and receive their loving prayers willingly, and may your people Israel's service always be pleasing to you. May our eyes behold your return to Zion in mercy. Blessed are you, Adonai, who returns your presence in Zion. And now for Thanksgiving. We thank you for being Adonai our God and God of our ancestors forever and ever. Rock of our lives, shield of our deliverance are you from generation to generation. We thank you and recount your praises for our lives that are entrusted into your hand, and for our souls that are in your care, and for your miracles that are with us every day, and for your wonders and favors that are at every time, evening, morning, and noon. O good one, whose mercies never end, O merciful one, whose kindnesses never cease, we have always put our hope in you. For all these things, blessed and exalted be your name, our ruler, constantly forever and ever. Let all living things thank you, Selah, praise your name in truth, God of our deliverance and our help, Selah. Blessed are you, Adonai, whose name is good and to whom it is fitting to give thanks. Baruch atah Adonai, atov shemcha lecha na'el lahodot. And now for our final prayer of peace. Bestow abundant peace upon your people Israel forever, because you are supreme ruler of all peace. It is good in your eyes to bless your people Israel at every time and at every hour with your peace. Blessed are you, Adonai, who blesses your people Israel and all the world with peace. We'll ask Mark now to chant for us, Shalom Rav.
Shalom Rahav Yisrael Amcha Tosi Leolam. Shalom Rahav Yisrael Amcha Tosi Leolam. Ki atahu melech Adon l'chol hashalom. Ki atahu melech Adon l'chol hashalom. Shalom Rahav Yisrael Amcha Tosi leolam. Shalom Rahav Yisrael Amcha Tosi leolam. V'tova necha levorech Esamo Yisrael, B'cholat B'chol Shava, B'shlomecha. Shalom Rahav Yisrael Amcha Tosi leolam. Shalom Rahav Yisrael Amcha Tosi leolam. Tosi leolam.
Amen. Watch over me that I may speak kindly to others, protect me from harm's way. Guide me with your teachings that all that I say and all that I do may give honor to your name. Accept my prayers, my thoughts, and my meditations. Bless all who live on earth with peace. And now we're going to continue with chanting of the Vaihulu, only this time with a different, more beautiful melody. We can find that on page 37.
Vayichulu hashamayim v'haaretz v'chol tzivam. Vayichal Elohim bayom hashvi מלאכתו אשר עשה. וישפוט ביום השביעי מכל מלאכתו אשר עשה. Lai lai la lai lai la lai la lai lai la lai la lai lai la lai la lai la lai la lai lai la lai la lai lai la lai la lai la lai lai. Vayivarech Elohim et Yom Hashvi'i vayikadesh oto ki vo Shabbat Mikol Mlakto Asher Bar Elohim Lasot La 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 la.
Now for the Kaddish Shalem, the full Kaddish after the Amidah.
Yitgadav Yitgadash Shemei Rabbah. V'yalmad Yivarach Yirutei, v'yamlich Malchutei, b'chayechon u'vyomechon, u'v'chayetzchol Beit Yisrael, ba'agala u'v'zman kari v'yimru, Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabbah Mevorach, v'yalam l'al me'amaya, Yitbarach, Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yipar v'yiromam v'yinaseh, v'yithadar v'yitalev v'yithalal Shmei Kudusha b'richu, Le'elamin kol berchata v'shirata, Tushbachata v'nechemata, da'amiram b'alma v'yimru, Amen. Tika batzvot honu v'ahuhon, zechol Yisrael kadam avuhon di v'shmaya v'yimru, Amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shmaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru, Amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru, imru, Amen. Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, yaseh shalom, Shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru, Amen.
Amen. And before we recite the Aleinu, now it's our tradition each day, as I mentioned, to count the Omer, to count the days between Passover and Shavuot. I am prepared and ready to fulfill the mitzvah of counting the Omer as is written in the Torah. And you shall count for yourselves from the day following the day of rest, from the day you bring the Omer as the grain offering. 7 complete weeks there shall be until the day after the 7th week. You shall count 50 days after, and you shall bring a new offering to God. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kedishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al sefirat ha'omer. And so now if we counted, as we mentioned before, we are looking for day number 13. Hayom shlosha asar yom shehem shavua echad v'shisha yamim la omer. We're now going to turn back to the Aleinu, page 41.
Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol, l'atei gedula liotze bereshit, shelo asanu kegoye haratzot, v'lo samanu k'mishpachot hadama, shelo sam chelkenu kahem, v'goralenu k'chol hamonam, v'anachnu korim, Umishtachavim umodim lifnei melech malchei hamlachim hakadosh baruch hu shehu noteh shamayim v'yosed haaretz umoshev yikaro bashamayim imal ushchinatu zo begavhei meromim Hu Eloheinu einod, emet malkeinu evazulato, kakat הכתוב בתורתו, וידעת היום והשבות אל לבביך, כי אדוני הוא אלוהים בשמיים ממעל, ועל הארץ מתחת אין עוד.
Okay, נקבל לך אומר להידל לראות מהרה בתפארת וזך על הבגדל. כי קירובנו כל יושבי תבל, כי לך תבחר כברך שבכל לשון לפניך מלאים. כי המלכות שלך היא לא מייתן לך בכבוד ככתוב בתורתך.
אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ. ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד.
We are now going to invite you to join in reciting the Mourner's Kaddish, and if you have a yortzeit, we are going to mention the names for whom we observe. If you are joining us from the outside and you have any names that you would like to pronounce to yourself, so you can include those with those that we will name now. So we observe the yortzeits for Julius Dietz, Marvin Todd Fine, Martha Kurzrock, Albert Avansky, Herbert Casper, Carl Rosenfeld, Molly Fogel, Marion Weintraub, Philip Weissman, Alan Mionis, Morris Seidman, Elias Bernstein, Diana Glazer, Reba Stoller, Helen Cohen, Morris Lieb, Jacob Morris Levy, Louis Schwartz, Rebecca Call, Dr. Boris Benjaminson, Irving Rappaport, Lillian Segman, Yetta Finger, Raymond Komorski, Yetta Kupfer, Zev Sticker, Marvin Zuckerman, Irving Rappaport, Aaron Owitz, Goldie Pinsky, Stephen Teeger, Jacob Schlossberg Bagatis, Robert W. Goldsmith, Jacob Dembowick, Louis Segman, and Louis Ushinsky. In that unbroken chain, which links one generation to the next, we recite this mourner's Kaddish. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah. V'alama diverach Yeruteh, v'amlich malchuteh, v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayeh d'chol Beit Yisrael, ba'agala u'bizman kariv v'emeru. Amen. Yehei shemei Rabbah v'varach, li'olam ul-almei al-maya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpoar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yithadar v'yithaleh v'yithalal shemei d'kodeshah b'richu. Le'elam min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, da'amiran ba'alma v'emeru. Amen. Yehei shlama Rabbah min Shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'emru. Amen. Oseh shalom v'imromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'emeru. Amen. We have a tradition in our congregation to recite a special prayer for anyone that is ill. So we ask you to keep in mind those whom you know of that are in need of our prayers, and we join each of our prayers together to ask for healing for those loved ones and for those who are ill anywhere in the world. A beautiful tune that was composed by Debbie Friedman under the title, of course, Misha Beirach. May God, who is the one that blesses us, may God also bless and heal all those whom we care so much about.
Misha Beirach Avotenu Mekor HaBracha Leimotenu. May the source of strength who bless the ones before us help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen. Misha Beirach Imotenu Mekor HaBracha Lavo avotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen.
Refuah Shalema, complete healing to all those who are ill. We're going now to recite the Kiddush. If you happen to have anything to imbibe, that would be great, to take your cup, to say with us the blessing over the wine. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kedeshanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu, b'shabbat kadosho b'ahava v'baratzon hinchilanu, zikaron lama'aseh v'reshit, ki hu yom techila hamikra kodesh, zecher litziat mitzrayim, ki banu v'charta v'otanu kidashta b'kol ha'amim v'shabbat kadshucha v'yahava v'ratzon hinchaltan. Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh ha-Shabbat. Amen. L'chaim, everybody, to life. And now I'm going to take my Lechem Mishnah, my 2 rolls, and say the blessing Hamotzi. Also compliments of Manny, who the organizer for our earlier event, who brings me challah rolls each week. And I'm always surprised because I never know, from plain to poppy seed to sesame. He hasn't given me an everything challah roll. I don't know if they exist yet. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen. All right, while I'm chewing, we'll ask Alan if he wants to come on and give us something inspiring to leave us with.
Shabbat Shalom. Sammy and his wife Becky went for hamburgers every Saturday night. They went up to the counter and Sammy placed an order for 1 hamburger, French fries, and a drink. After they sat at a table with the food, Sammy unwrapped the plain hamburger and carefully cut it in half, placing 1/2 in front of Becky. He then carefully counted out the French fries, dividing them into 2 piles and neatly placed 1 pile in front of Becky. He took a sip of the drink. Becky took a sip and then set the cup down between them. As he began to eat his few bites of hamburger, the people around them were looking over and whispering. Obviously, they were thinking, that poor old couple, all they can afford is 1 meal for the 2 of them. As the man began to eat his fries, a young man came over to the table and politely offered to buy another meal for the old couple. Sammy said that they were just fine. They were used to sharing everything. People closer to the table noticed that his wife hadn't eaten a bite. She sat there patiently watching her husband eat and occasionally take turns sipping the drink. After, the young man came over and begged them to let him buy another meal for them. This time, the old woman said, "No, thank you. We are used to sharing everything." Finally, Sammy finished and was wiping his face neatly with the napkin. The young man again came over to Becky, who had yet to eat a single bite of food, and asked what it is that she was waiting for. Her answer, the teeth.
And was he supposed to supply that for her as well?
They shared them.
Oh, that's right. Okay, that's a loving couple. All right, so we want to thank you all for joining us here for our Friday night evening service, and of course to Bernice and her mom Ruth for staying with us and for enlightening us very much about the book that Bernice had authored called All the Horrors of War. I do entreat you to buy the book and read it. It is incredible, and you won't be able to put it down. It's so well written with so much detail in such an interesting way, and you really gain insights into what it was like to be there and to be liberated from there and the aftermath. So we want to thank all those who participated. Cheryl, thank you so much for leading services this evening. To any members of Congregation B'nai Jeshurun and whoever else is joining us, welcome. We're here every Friday, and Zoom, of course, has become ubiquitous everywhere. So you have a plethora of choices for which Zoom service to join, and we appreciate that you gave us your attention this particular evening. Thanks to Mark for helping to lead, and Alan, of course. And we are going to conclude our services now with the chanting of Adon Olam.
Adon Olam, Asher Malach, B'Terem Kol Yitzir Nifra, L'Yesh Hasov V'Chevso Kol, Azai Melech Shemona Kro Adon Olam, V'Yacharei Yichlos HaKol, Levado Yimloch Naro Adon Olam, V'Hu Echad, V'Hu Ovev, V'Hu Yeh, V'Sifbora, Adon Olam, Asher Malach, B'Terem Kol Yitzir Nifra, L'Yesh Hasov V'Chevso Kol, Azai Melech Shemona Kro Adon Olam, V'Hu Echad, V'Yein Sheni, Aham Shalom Lach B'Ro Adon Olam, V'Li Rachis, V'Li Saklis, V'Lo Hos V'Hamish Ro Adon Olam, Asher Malach, B'Terem Kol Yitzir Nifra, L'Yesh Hasov V'Chevso Kol, Azai Melech Shemona Kro Adon Olam, V'Hu Eli, V'Chai Goli, V'Suach V'Li V'Yeser Adon Olam, V'Hu Nisi, V'Monosli, V'Nos Kosev V'Yomek Ro Adon Olam, Asher Malach, B'Terem Kol Yitzir Nifra, L'Yesh Hasov V'Chevso Kol, Azai Melech Shemona Kro Adon Olam, V'Yahado Avkiruchi, V'Yeshishan V'Yoyra Adon Olam, V'Yimruchi, V'Yasi, Adon Oli B'Loi Ra Adon Olam, Asher Malach, B'Terem Kol Yitzir Nifra, L'Yesh Hasov V'Chevso Kol, Azai Melech Shemona Kro Adon Olam.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Maddie, for organizing the event this evening. And we wish each of you a Shabbat Shalom, a peaceful Sabbath. And you can unmute yourselves and talk to each other at length. Rabbi Sam, you're here. So would you like to say something?
Yeah.
Rabbi Sam from B'nai Jeshurun.
I can unmute. Okay. Hi, quick thought for anybody still there. So in our Parsha this week, we have this story of Aaron, his sons, and I don't know why I have a glare, and his sons go above and beyond. They do Hiddur mitzvah, and they bring an offering. And in return, they get zapped. So the big question is why? What did they do so bad that's worthy of the death penalty? So some of the rabbis say that they were drunk, and they base it on the next subject that comes after. Some of the rabbis say because they didn't get married, have children. And then other rabbis say it's because they tried to show up Moses and tried to take power for themselves. And there's a lot of lessons that we can learn from it. But the lesson that I'm taking from it this week is that going above and beyond is not necessarily always good, just as the rabbi was talking about in terms of going to the extremes of chesed or gevura. It also context and what the person and what their love language is is also required. And clearly in that setting, God had spelled out every single detail in, and it was a very clear program, and it was disrespectful for them to go above and beyond. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shalom.
Sam?
Shabbat shalom.
Thank you, Ken.
Shabbat shalom. Thank you, Rabbi Stern.
And
Thank
for
you.
inviting us, joining us this evening.
Yes, we're very, very pleased to be invited, and really was a beautiful evening. Thank you.
Is this the
Shabbat
voice?
shalom.
Is this the voice of Sandra?
Sandy
This
Conrad.
is-
Yeah, Sandy, you have, it's just your name. There's no picture.
I'm here.
Turn your video on so we can see you.
We
I
have no,
see her.
we have no picture. How do we get on?
Oh, you just press the, there you are. All right, Sandy.
Oh, okay. I don't know why. Hello, hello.
Welcome.
Hello.
Well, it's free to talk.
Michael, we're back. We're back. Oh, wonderful. Just in time for cold weather. Well, we brought the warm weather from Florida. We brought the rain. Where is it? We brought the rain.
Snowbird.
Linda.
You can see them flying over.
Wow.
Good Shabbat